So let's talk about the various parts of the body that we use when we sing. So if you're new to my channel, I make videos about all kinds of things related to Byzantine chanting. And even if you're not a chanter, this is still going to be helpful to you. So if you know somebody who might find this helpful, you can share to them. As always, feel free to subscribe so you can see more of these videos. And just to clarify, when I say parts of the body we use when we sing, I'm talking about the parts of the body that we have a significant amount of control over. So there's a lot of parts of the body involved when we sing that we don't really have much control over, like the vocal cords closing and opening. I'm not really going to talk about that. There's not any use talking about that. This is not like a scientific video, it's just a practical video. There's a lot of things. The point is just to focus on the things we can control so we can optimize our voice. So what's the first thing? Oh, by the way, also, I want to mention a lot of what I'm going to suggest here, a lot of what I'm going to say as far as how to breathe and some of those things, a lot of this is going to be kind of suggestions because you have to personally do what works for you, and what might work for one person might not work for the other person. So you have to kind of see what works for you as long as you follow a few guidelines, and that is you should never have any tension in your throat, jaw, mouth area. Anything from here up should never be tense, should never be doing any work. And also, you don't want to ever be pushing air, pushing breath, and forcing anything. You never want to force anything, and you never want to be breathy. And of course, these are things to talk about in another video. But basically, what's the first part of the body we use? It would be the lungs. So the lungs are used to take a deep breath when we chant, when we sing, but not a breath in the same way that we would breathe in our everyday tasks, like going to the grocery store or whatever. In our everyday life, we use a form of breathing that we would call clavicular, or chest breathing, or shallow breathing. So if I were to use this type of breathing, and I just basically just fill up my chest, and only my chest kind of expands, or you might see my shoulders go up. This isn't the kind of breathing we want to use when we chant. When we chant, we want to use a much deeper breathing, and which means we're going to feel the breath going, again, let me clarify, we're going to feel the breath. I know scientifically it might not work exactly as I'm explaining, and I'll get into that, but as I said, we're going to just feel. We're going to feel the breath very deep in our body when we are breathing correctly for chanting. So that might be in your lower back and just very low in your body as opposed to shallow breathing. So the second part of the body that we are going to use is known as the diaphragm. So the diaphragm is like a dome-shaped sort of thing. It's located right about right here. And if I use my diaphragm, and if I breathe correctly to engage my diaphragm, it's going to lower. It's going to lower down here. And what I'm going to notice is that I'm going to feel a sort of expansion down here. And it's not that breath is going down here, right? If I take a deep breath and I use my diaphragm when I breathe, I'm going to feel an expansion down here, like I said. That doesn't mean my breath is going down here. It just means I'm using my lungs at their full capacity. And the diaphragm is lowering, and that pushes the internal organs out and down. So that's why you have this sort of expansion. So regardless of how you breathe, of course you want to breathe deeply, but there are different ways to breathe. Some people might suggest breathing into your lower back, breathing, until you feel breath in your lower back. And some of these people say that you might want to pull in the low abs, not the upper, but the lower abdomen, and pull it in so you make room for breath in your lower back. So that's one way to breathe, and I have to make, another video talking about this in more detail. Other people say, and again, like I said, you have to do what works for you. But both of these things, regardless, I'm referring to deep breathing. So you can also, if you just take a deep breath using your diaphragm, like I said, everything will lower and expand outward. So your abdomen and your lower abs, everything will expand outward. Regardless, you are doing, a form of deep breathing. So regardless of how you breathe, when you chant, you want to learn to engage your diaphragm. And like I said, if you take a breath correctly using your diaphragm, you're going to find that there's an expansion, an outward expansion. Now, the way to know that you're doing it correctly is it should be taut, T-A-U-T, like a tennis racket. So, in other words, if you're doing it wrong, it's going to feel hard because you can stick out your stomach muscles, right? And that's not the point. Like, that's not what I'm trying to do. If I just stick out my stomach muscles, I can cause an expansion that way. But see how it's hard as a rock? Then I know I'm not doing it right. If I take a breath correctly using my diaphragm and it expands, it should have a tautness. I should be able to push on it, and it should give a little bit and then, come back. I don't know if it shows, but you see I'm able to. So it's taut, like a tennis racket. This is how you know you're doing it, you're using your diaphragm correctly. And there are also things that we might call diaphragm instigators. Some exercises to help you kind of locate the sensation of using your diaphragm. So if I cough, like a miniature cough, let's say I take a deep breath. Let's say I take a deep breath into my lower back, as some people say to do, and I cough. You see how there's this little outward expansion, right? And it's taut, like a tennis racket. So I'm not just sticking it out, because then if I was just sticking it out with my muscles, it would be hard, like this. Then I'm doing it wrong. But if it's taut like a tennis racket, I'm doing it right. Basically, this cough causes the diaphragm to kind of be engaged in a sense. So you can practice this to learn to use your diaphragm. Similarly, like if you hiccup, right? See how it kind of jumped out? That's basically an example of engaging my diaphragm. And you'll notice babies do this when they cry. You will see, babies basically use their diaphragm. That's how they can, cry all night long and their voice doesn't get tired. So it's a very natural way to use your voice. It's how God made our voice, So, what was I going to say? So basically, the reason I'm saying this is because when we chant, we want to use our diaphragm. And the common word is called, breath support. But the original word is called appoggio. And appoggio doesn't necessarily mean to support. It means to lean. So keep that in mind. So you can almost think of it as if you are taking a breath, and think of it as if you're leaning the breath on the diaphragm, right? So practice engaging your diaphragm. And when you breathe properly, you can practice or think of leaning that breath on the diaphragm. That is a better idea, or a better image of breath support. Because you don't want to think of breath support as some sort of pushing. It's not. It's a more of a lean. But anyway, that's another video for another time. But that's the diaphragm, and we want to use the diaphragm when we sing. Another part of the body is the lower abs, and like I said, some people like to breathe by pulling in their lower abs, not your upper abs, not up here, your lower abs. If you pull in your lower abs, this is what some people do. You've eliminated the lower abs as a place for air. So air cannot go there when you take a breath. So the idea is the air goes into your lower back instead. So why is that helpful? Well, and again, for the people, the science people or whatever, just, I'm not saying the breath literally goes into your lower back. I'm saying you feel it in your lower back. I don't care what happens scientifically. Like, it doesn't matter to me. All I care is what you do, what helps you as a chanter to use your voice. And the truth is, you can feel the sensation of air deep into your lower back. And that's why some people pull in their abdomen and the air goes into the lower back. And the idea is you make more room for more air so you can fill up with as much air as possible. In this case, your lower abs are used when you sing. So, again, you can try what works for you. So next is the back and the lat muscles on the back. So these muscles help with your basically supporting your body in the correct posture, because you want to stand up straight, but you don't want to force the posture. You don't want to force yourself to stand up straight. It has to be natural. So ideally, you want to have strong back muscles. What else? Next is the mouth and the jaw. So at first, when you're first learning to chant, think of the mouth and the jaw as being inactive, because they don't really do much. You shouldn't do much with your mouth and your jaw and your throat. And I'll explain how this could be. I'll explain a sort of exception to this, but think of your breath as doing all the work for your voice. In other words, if you do what you're supposed to do down here, as I explained, with breathing deeply, then this area should naturally relax. It should naturally open. You shouldn't have to do anything. I say this because as you're, especially for a beginner, if you're learning, it can be easy to think you're doing the right thing as far as up here, but maybe you're not. Maybe you're making things worse. And let me explain. You hear often that you need to open your throat. You need to open your throat to let your voice, but this is tricky because what is when they say your throat, what are they referring to? Are they referring down here, the trachea? They're not, but sometimes you might think of it as being your trachea. And they say open your throat in a yawn. And I'll just explain, like in Byzantine chanting, there is a kind of specific resonance, specific sound you've probably noticed that's unique to Byzantine chanting, that's different from, let's say, contemporary music. And it does include a certain amount of space, but that space is created, they will say, in the back of the throat. It's created in the throat, in the pharynx, as a sort of yawn. But I have to clarify this. It's in the upper pharynx. It's up here. At least think of it as being up here. It's not down here. I don't want to create action, any sort of action, muscular action down here in my throat, in my trachea, right? That's not what we're talking about. It's in the upper pharynx. It's a very important distinction that people don't talk about. So that's why I say when you're first learning, just focus on breathing correctly. Let this do its job on its own. And that brings me to the next thing, which is the tongue. Think of your tongue as helping you pronounce your words and your diction, rather than using your mouth for diction. So what some people do is they mouth the vowels in an exaggerated way, like ooh, e, or whatever, and you don't want to do that. because that messes up the resonance of your voice. So when I'm talking to you right now, I'm not mouthing weird things. Like I don't need to do it when I talk. So why would I need to do it when I sing? So that's what your tongue is for. Let your tongue, most of my diction as what I'm talking right now is created by my tongue. It's the same thing when you're chanting. So don't try to mouth your words in exaggerated ways, because this can actually create tension. If I open my mouth in a ooh vowel in a weird way, it's actually very tense. So that's why you don't want to do that. Next is your chest. The chest should be out, open. Now the back muscles together with the chest help with the ideal posture. You don't want to force your chest out, but you want to make sure it's open, and you want to make sure your shoulders are naturally back. And if you open your chest, your shoulders will naturally be back. And this helps you to, breathe fully to the fullest capacity instead of it being collapsed and closed in. Like, you don't want that. Next is the intercostal muscles. These are some muscles that are, a lot of chanting teachers don't talk about this stuff. So that's why this is important. It's not, you don't want to just know the notation. You want to know this stuff as well, because this stuff is important. But very few people talk about this. But anyway, the intercostal muscles are located between the ribs, between each rib. And their job when you sing is to squeeze every bit of breath out, not on its own. It's not something you do consciously when you sing, but I'll explain. Naturally, they just squeeze every bit of breath out of your lungs, and this is helpful for high notes to get that correct pressure of breath for the higher notes. So you need to train and strengthen these intercostal muscles. Now, I will say, this is a video for another time. I have to make another video about this, but just keep in mind, you need to strengthen your intercostal muscles. Until I've made the video, don't worry about the intercostal muscles, but when I make the video, I'm going to show you how to strengthen these muscles. And when I do, just know that when you strengthen your intercostal muscles, what it does is when you chant, it will have this sort of muscle memory where it will do what it's supposed to do without you needing to worry about it, because you've already strengthened them, right? So last but not least is your brain. So your brain is very, very important when you chant because of your mindset. And what I mean by that is, if you think something is very difficult, let's say a high note, for example. If you think high notes are very difficult, then it's literally going to, I know it sounds silly, but it's literally going to send a signal to all these muscles around your voice. And by the way, that's why I say don't worry too much about the mouth area, because the problem is you can't really see any of these muscles around here, your pharynx, your uvula, the soft palate, the hard palate. We use these things when we chant, but you can't see them, really. You can kind of see your soft palate and your hard palate. A lot of these things you can't see, and a lot of these things you can't directly control. You can learn to control them, but you can't directly control them like I can control my bicep right now and flex it and whatever. So that's why it's important to have the right mindset, because if you think something's really difficult, it's going to almost tense up these muscles, right? And you don't want that. You don't want these muscles, any of these muscles, to tense up, to tighten up, because you don't want any tension. So it's best to always not think of chanting as being difficult. It's not as difficult as you think. Learning the notation is not as difficult as you think. Singing high notes is not as difficult as you think. So never think of it as being difficult. Just tell yourself you'll work on it, and you don't want to have a negative mindset that will cause tension. So those are the parts of the body that you use when you chant. So if you want to work with me one-on-one to kind of help with learning some more of this stuff, practically, click the link to schedule a free lesson. I hope this was helpful, and share this with someone that you think would benefit from it.